Good to see you, Sean. So first of all, could you begin by telling us what it entails to be, well, at Virtual Statman and to be doing stats for a TV network like Speed and indeed other networks around the world?
It means making sure that our talent on the air have everything they need to broadcast the race with in terms of every fact, every historical reference point, and also on a broader basis, tire data, tire analysis, all of those sorts of things. I do have a minor engineering background academically as well, but mainly it's statistics in terms of historical references such as this is the 25th time this has happened, blah, blah, or this hasn't happened since 1973, that kind of thing.
How do you go about putting together all that information?
Well, obviously, I have a set routine that I go through these days, having done it for so long, but what you do is you start off, you take the results of the previous race, and you want to build those into the database, which I have built myself. And a pattern, building that over the course of a season, patterns start to develop, and you start to be able to get more out of the data than is, ostensibly there. So you start to see things like, the driver that's qualified 18th has been in the points the last 5 races, or things like that. Or have you noticed that, Michael Schumacher has been fastest in the speed trap 4 times this year, which is more than any other driver, So you're looking for little things like that, little nuances. And you're also looking at, there are other things like, anniversaries. Oh, this is the 50th anniversary of such and such, or, things like that. Or, this is only the second time that, Red Bull have run this engine cover. They ran it in this race, and by Jove, they were first and second. So, hopefully they'll get the same thing. So you're always looking for little nooks and crannies to exploit.
And what made you think of doing this in the first place? How did you identify the slot in the marketplace?
I mean, I'm kind of surprised that no one had thought of it, really. Necessity being the mother of invention. But there was, I guess, the thing is being a researcher is kind of considered the bottom rung of the ladder at television networks. And I think that rather than having a researcher at each network that just researched every show they did, I kind of turned that business model back to front and just had a researcher who did only one sport and sold it to every network. So that's how I ended up being where I am now. I saw it halfway through the first season. I was doing things with Speed, and I thought, well, we're all looking at the same TV pictures. If they need my work, so does everyone else. All I've got to do is convince them that they need it, and that's the bit that takes a long time. As in any industry, you have to build a reputation to the point where people will say, oh, okay, yeah, we probably should get this guy in because he's got a lot of experience.
Well, I believe Speed were pivotal in getting you started. How did that come about?
Well, it was the end of '02, and astonishingly, I was actually basically staring unemployment in the face. So my fantastic idea was, well, I'm going to be unemployed soon. I'm going to go and work in Formula One, because, of course, that's what people do. So I cold called the producer at the time, which was Frank Wilson, and I left a voicemail message which was something along the lines of, I'm going to change your life, Frank. This is the greatest day ever, and your broadcasting life will never be the same once you hire me. And I put the phone down somewhat cynically, thinking, like we'll hear from him. And to my astonishment, 3 days later, he called me back. So we had a good chat, and Frank is the kind of guy who will think, okay, that's what you say. Let's have a look and see what you can do. So he said, put something together and send it to me. So I did. And then he sent me what they'd been using, and I faxed it back an hour later with about 22 corrections in it. At which point they thought, well, we can hire you, but we don't have a budget for it. And they said, that we can only pay you just next to nothing. I thought, well, that's fine, no problem. Because as far as I was concerned, as a fan, I thought, this is fantastic. I'm now getting paid to watch Formula One races, which I would do anyway. Just like any fan, you think, oh, this is fantastic. So over the course of that first season, I was trying to build a reputation, and it was 2003, and that was, statistically speaking, it was a very unusual year because we had Alonso winning, the youngest winner in history, had the youngest podium, and we had other things like Minardi were 1-2 in first qualifying at Magny-Cours, and all these other weird and wonderful things happened. So that definitely helped because I was able to spot these things. And then Monza '03, we had the fastest race in history, whereas all of the mass media reported it the next day. We had it on Speed before Schumacher was in Parc Fermé. And there was I remember that there was that horrible 12-hour period where I thought, did I do my maths wrong? And have I completely thrown this network under the bus because I'm wrong? And thankfully, the next day it came out, yes, it was the fastest round. I thought, oh, it was a relief more than anything. But from that came the notion, well, maybe this guy can do a job for us on other networks, and I started selling it internationally in 2004, and it's been going pretty strong since then.
What's the most obscure stats you've ever come up with?
I've had a couple of those. Imola 04, I said, well, Michael Schumacher has just surpassed Juan Fangio's record for points per start. It's like 5.161 or something like that. And I remember Frank saying verbatim back to me, "You need to get a hobby, Sean. You really do need to go out and meet people." Monaco 09 was a bit of a dull race. It was dominated by Jenson Button. I think Barrichello was second. And late in that race, Barrichello passed the all-time laps raced record held by the aforementioned Schumacher. And again, it was one of those things where sometimes you put stats out there almost on a bet. You think, right, I'm going to put this out there, and anyone who runs it, wins. If you can find a way to work this into your program, because it's so obscure, then go have at it. And astonishingly, some of them did, because it was such a dull race that they were just cramming for anything. Because when the race is really good, I can take a step back. I still provide everything as normal, but I appreciate it's not going to have the airtime as when if it's a dull race in Hungary where it's led from start to finish and there's no overtaking. We need those kind of things.
Have you ever tried to do predictions based on your database?
In some senses I do, because I do a tyre analysis on Fridays, trying to analyse all of the runs and the long runs and the new tyre runs. So you're looking for things like the delta time between a prime tyre and an option tyre, which cars are not wearing the tyres out as quickly, who can do consistent times later in the run. So there's an element of prediction in that, but ultimately, yourself, Formula One is chaos theory. So many things can go wrong. It may not seem like that when Vettel is off taking 10 pole positions in a row or whatever, but a lot of things have to happen correctly for that to happen. So I find it. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but I find it impossible to predict, even with all this information. Maybe even because I have all this information, because there's so many. You can second guess it so much rather than just saying, "Oh, Vettel was on pole last time, so he'll be on pole this time." Whereas I look at it and think, well, Webber historically has been on pole here before, and he's always strong here, so that comes into it as well.
As a statistician, how much more information do you think there is out there in Formula One yet to be accumulated? I'm thinking a little bit along the lines of tennis and golf, where you see forced errors, unforced errors, particularly in tennis. And overtakes, of course, you can relate to either a driver error or a great pass.
You've got to be careful in that the things that you just mentioned are somewhat ambiguous. I mean, I have that with overtaking statistics. What constitutes a bona fide overtaking move? If the driver in front makes a mistake and runs wide, and the guy behind him passes, is that an overtaking move? Or is it just simply a mistake? Is it an unforced error? It's a bit like in tennis, as you mentioned, there's a difference between an unforced error and a winner. Those are two different things, but ultimately result in the other player winning the point. So you've got, that's, again, it's in the eye of the beholder, So I try not to put that too much in the show, because you want to put things that are absolutely black and white and are indisputable, because you have to bear in mind that I'm giving these numbers to people, and if they then say them on the air and they get a load of emails or tweets back saying no, that's not right, it's this, and their number could also be correct if you define it differently, you get into murky waters. So it's important to stick to things that can be said with absolute clarity. This is this team's first win since 2004, or because that is indisputable.
I've made a million mistakes in my life. I presume you, as a statistician, have never made any mistakes.
I've made many, many mistakes. Very few of them make it to air because of the preparation involved. You check things, you recheck things, and everything. And usually, because everything relates to each other, it becomes immediately obvious if you've sent something ready to go on the air that is not right. There have been a few clangers. In fact, most recently in Valencia, when I said Sebastian Vettel's the first guy to go through the first 8 races of the season without finishing lower than second, which is not true, because Alonso did it in 06, which was only a few years ago, and amazingly I'd forgotten about it. So it does happen, but to err is human, and the thing is if you tried to do this job and were scared of making mistakes, you would never send anything out at all. So you're always putting your neck on the block, especially when there's something like, oh, this hasn't happened since 1951. And you think, well, that's 800 races you've got to go through and check that that's right. So you really, really have to trust things. So sometimes you do make mistakes, but as I say, it's in our nature. And if you think about, drivers make mistakes in races, pit crews make mistakes in races. It's impossible to eradicate them. What you want is to get as close to 100% accurate as possible.
I don't know what it's like for you, but I find that Formula One events that took place in my early years remain crystal clear in my mind, and yet more recent events are a little bit more foggy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can remember, intimate details of, the 1987 Australian Grand Prix, but I can't remember sometimes, what happened on Sunday in the Hungarian Grand Prix. I can't remember, how many pit stops did. Oh, it was wet at the start. Yes, of course it was. Yes, that happens a lot because I'm same with you. It all starts to blur into one at some point, and it starts to become a little bit difficult to remember what's what. But certainly stuff from your formative years, teenage years, childhood. That's in there and it's locked. You will never get rid of it.
Well, you are obviously passionate about Formula One. Let's talk about your formative years.
I started watching Formula One in 1987. It was Brazil 87 was the first race I watched. And right from the start, my favourite driver was Nigel Mansell, and my favourite car was the Williams. And to this day, I still love to see Williams doing well. To me, Frank Williams is the Enzo Ferrari of our generation, because that team exists to race. It doesn't exist to sell cars or do anything else. It exists to go round the track and win races. And it's still called Williams because Frank Williams is still in charge. And I do hope when the day comes where Frank decides to sell it up, that it's not called Williams anymore, because it's not Frank. I feel passionate about it. It just becomes Williams PLC, and who cares about that? It's just another corporate organization. I love that it is Frank still in charge, just like it was Enzo in charge at Ferrari right until the day he died. And that to me is the epitome that's the racer's instinct. It's so, we're going to get out there and race. We're not getting out there to sell things. We just want to get out there and be quickest and do all that kind of stuff, which I think is fantastic. And Mansell, I was particularly interested because he was so, I don't want to say bravado, gung-ho. He was, say what you like about him. I mean, many people hated the guy and, strongly disliked him. I thought he was fantastic for Formula One because love him or loathe him, you couldn't take your eyes off him. He was always the center of attention. He was like a rock star. I mean, I know people look back retrospectively on Senna and think, wow, he was amazing. He could captivate everyone. And he could. But we underestimate the contribution made by Mansell, who could make up 30 seconds on someone and pass them for a victory. Or he could just as easily crash on the first lap and have a bit of a rant and a rave at people. And that's what made him so captivating. Maybe I didn't have to work with him when he was in that kind of mood, which maybe would have changed things. But I thought he was absolutely fantastic to watch. And certainly, if it hadn't been for Mansell, maybe I wouldn't have pursued F1 as a fan so much when I was so young. And I don't want to say I owe my career to him or anything, but certainly he was a big part in getting me in, because I remember in '93 when he went off to IndyCar, I was sort of thinking, do I really want to carry on watching Formula One? And yeah, there was definitely a period where I felt not bereavement but bereft. So I was like, well, Mansell's not racing, I'm not so interested anymore, And then he came back and I thought, this is fantastic, I can't believe he's back, like a phoenix from the flames.
Thanks, Sean, and very best of luck with your future endeavours.